Hi, and welcome to Attached Together, the podcast where we explore attachment theory and what it really means in practice for counsellors, psychotherapists, and psychologists. This podcast is created by the team at Optima, who deliver the Level 5 and Level 7 diplomas in attachment based psychotherapy. It's a space designed to help you deepen your understanding, reflect on your clinical work, and stay connected to the heart of attachment informed practice. I'm Jo, a counsellor, supervisor, and attachment based psychotherapist. I founded and created the Level 5 and Level 7 courses at Optima. Before we get into today's subject, just like to remind you that our episodes include a CPD certificate. And if you'd like to access that, you can visit our website or check the show notes for a link. Joining me today is Jane Brown. Jane is an experienced relationship counsellor working online with individuals and couples, both in private practice and with Relate, where she also teaches on a diploma program as well as our Level 5 diploma. Jane's work is integrative and firmly rooted in attachment theory, making her a wonderful guest for today's conversation on affect regulation, including working with couples. Jane, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Before we get into the theory of affect regulation, because this can sound quite technical, can't it?
Yes, it can.
We know that at its heart, it's about how we manage the storms inside us, especially in relationships. So, how would you introduce this idea to someone who has never heard the term before?
Yeah, so Joe, what I would say is that affect regulation is really the capacity to monitor, evaluate, and manage emotional experiences and how they're expressed. It's really the ability to respond to intense feelings without becoming overwhelmed. And what we know is that difficulty with managing affect is often rooted in early relational patterns. So often the primary caregiver has either failed entirely to respond to the infant's needs, or they may have responded inconsistently. And what these non-optimal environments lead to is essentially the infant being exposed to high levels of adrenaline and cortisol. And if they haven't been consistently soothed, then they haven't been able to learn that for themselves, and therefore defenses are triggered. So defenses might be around proximity seeking, or they might be around avoidance. And these are the types of defenses that we see then in our therapy rooms within our couples.
Yeah. So give me an example then. So you've got a couple that come in and they come into the therapy room, and I guess they're coming probably about maybe an argument that happens over and over again. I'm guessing from my own experience that, they're sitting down and they're looking for a solution to the argument. It's not really about the argument, is it?
No, it's not. It's often about the connection first. It's about the connection between the couple. So essentially, it's often about really slowing things down.
Mhm.
So often what I would see in the therapy room is a real common presentation around a kind of a pursuer-distancer dynamic. So often we might see the pursuer as kind of that preoccupied, perhaps, attachment style, and the distancer who adopts a more avoidant style.
I kind of think a bit like a dance floor, where you've got one person on the dance floor begging the other person to kind of come and dance with me, come and dance with me. It's all that pursuer. And the withdrawer's like, no, 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 no. But I guess in couples therapy, it's about, isn't it, getting them to get on the same dance floor and learn some kind of a dance together?
Yes, you're absolutely right, because when those dynamics are playing out, in terms of affect regulation, both individuals are dysregulated at that point.
Mhm.
They are in their fight-flight part of their brain and their defenses are up. So the pursuer's defense around proximity seeking is activated, and the distancer's defenses around avoidance is equally activated. And that's, as you say, it's the dance. It just goes round and round, and it can be hugely powerful and hugely destructive as well.
Yeah. So as a therapist, then where are we in the middle of that dance? What's our job in that?
Well, I think, first of all, our job is to name what is happening.
Mhm.
I would say that that is a Really important intervention. Almost, we might say, to name it is to tame it.
Mhm.
And we may do that in a certain way. So often we get high conflict couples, and it's really difficult sometimes. I don't know whether you find this, Joe, but to try and get a word in edgeways.
I think sometimes it's about letting that play out. We're getting a lot of data, aren't we? And I think for me, it's the tension. I think it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. The couple come in and they sit down with this argument, and you think they want an answer, they want a solution, and they kind of feels sometimes for me that they want it there and then. But like you're saying, it's about slowing things down, isn't it? About sitting back with that and just not getting caught, I suppose, in that dance with them.
Yes, because we absolutely don't want to be on the dance floor with them. We need to be off that floor and we need to be observing. So, as you rightly say, it really starts with us and making sure before we even come into that arena that we are managing our own affect as therapists. That is really important.
I got this image when you said about us not being on the dance floor, almost like that glitter ball. We're above them, aren't we? We're looking at all facets
Yes.
of what's going on in that dynamic of that argument.
Yes, most definitely. And as you say, sometimes sitting back and allowing that to play out then creates an opportunity for us as therapists. We might say something along the lines of, "Can I just stop you both there? I wonder whether it might be helpful for me to give you some of my reflections." And what you'll often get at that point is a bit of a, "Okay, all right, we're going to get some information here." And that often is the opportunity to be able to talk about what we might be seeing and what the cycle that we might be witnessing.
Yeah, yeah. I love that idea of giving them our reflections. Would you say that that's got to be quite tentative in terms of who's going to be best at hearing that, the pursuer or the withdrawer? Do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Often I even think before we've even gone into that, before we've even actually gone into the reflection point, is perhaps to take a pause. Just as you were actually saying that, I was thinking, yeah, actually, they might be dysregulated at that point. Are either of them going to be in a place to receive that? So actually, it might be, okay, let's just take a pause. Let's just kind of have a bit of a check-in, perhaps. What's going on for each of you right now in terms of what are you feeling within your bodies? We might do a bit of that somatic work.
What does that look like, Jane?
So somatic work really looks at what are we experiencing within our bodies. It's a key part of affect regulation. It's all about how our bodies are feeling and how our bodies are experiencing, and also from an attachment perspective, what our bodies are remembering as well of past trauma or of past relational experiences.
Yeah. Do you do any exercises with couples to get them to regulate themselves or each other in the room?
Yeah, so, actually what I do when I first start working with a couple is that I try and introduce some of this information up front, certainly around the individual responsibility side of things. So what I mean by that is that if we have two individuals that come into the couple environment that are both dysregulated, that is really difficult to work with. And whereas, of course, we respond to what we have in front of us, I think giving the information up front in terms of the affect regulation and what is needed in order to be able to think and feel and be rational can be really helpful, because it gives couples as individuals some time to reflect on what they might need to do in terms of managing themselves.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's that early sort of introduction, that's that early signposting piece, perhaps even at the assessment stage, or certainly in the first session. And then in terms of within session, what I might introduce a almost kind of a connection check-in. So what I might say is something along the lines of, I just want to take a little pause here and let's just think about the connection. I understand that what you're saying here is really important for both of you, and this argument is really painful, and we're going to come back to that. But let's just take a pause right now and let's just focus on the connection between the two of you. So if I was going to ask you what you might rate your connection out of 10, 10 being the most connected you've ever felt, 0 being the least, what would it be right now? And I would ask that to each of the couple. And then I would say, if I was a fly on the wall, and that was a 7 or an 8, what would I be noticing differently? And
Mhm.
often they say something like, "Well, we would actually be sat a bit closer together."
Mhm.
Right, okay. Well, actually, what he normally does is just put his hand on my knee. And what I might say is, okay, how would it feel just to do that right now? And working in the moment can often have a huge impact.
Yeah, it kind of stops that, doesn't it? Gives them chance to regulate, is what you're saying. And I
Yes.
really like that. If I was a fly on the wall, what would connected look like? What would it mean? What does it feel like? Because I think if we think about love languages, for
Mm.
example, everyone's thoughts of connection is different, isn't it? So you're getting the couple to use their own resources to feel connected in the moment.
Well, 100%. And also, it is about, as you say, it's about giving the couple the resources that they already know. And it's also about giving reassurance and hope that
Yes.
they have been connected before. It's just that right in this moment, they are dysregulated and they
Yeah.
just need to bring themselves back and need a little bit of help to do that. But ultimately, they can do it.
Yeah. That sort of idea of rupture and repair, that they can have a rupture and then repair afterwards.
Yes. And what we're doing, Joe, is very much modeling that moment by moment.
Yeah, yeah. Is that always possible? What what I'm wondering now is what happens if one of the couple has never experienced repair?
Yeah, I think that is a real challenge. It really is. And I think with that, what we need to do is work really slow.
Mhm.
We have to slow things down. I mean, I might introduce even perhaps a breathing exercise and perhaps do that together, the three of us.
Yeah.
You know, I might, I might want to temperature check that, and just how would it feel to do a little bit of breathing now? What would that feel like to do that?
One of the things that I've done with some couples in the past is I've got them, if I've seen them together, is we've all stood up and I've got them to actually hold each other and breathe while they're holding each other, just so that they can kind of create some safe space. Not with all couples, it's not always possible. And I have actually done it when I've worked online with couples as well. I've got them to, if they're in the same room. I guess the problem is if they're not, they can't do that if they're not in the same room, can they?
No, but I think that that's a lovely example of, that natural want and human drive to be close to another.
Mhm.
And, the romantic partner that we've sought out, being able to co-regulate through physical touch. It's so powerful, isn't it?
It is, yeah. As you were just saying that, Jane, what I was thinking about was I think something we touched on right at the beginning, that often the arguments that couples are getting into that exacerbate the affect, often really it's not about the argument, would you say?
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. So, often what we say from an attachment perspective is that we seek a romantic partner based on familiarity. So, what we're looking for is something that is familiar to us. And that can be either positive or negative.
Yeah, yeah.
So, for example, we might have a client who has chosen their partner who reminds them of their father.
Hmm.
And perhaps, the father was terribly avoidant.
Hmm.
And then, what happens is that there is an unconscious expectation that the attachment wound that is being brought is somehow repaired. But of course, a lot of the time, the other partner is completely unaware and also having their own defenses triggered and their own attachment wounds reopened at the same time.
Yeah. So, sort of this expectation that this new relationship that feels familiar could actually have a different outcome, but without the awareness, because this is all unconscious stuff, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, most definitely. And then, as you say, so it's rarely about the actual thing, whether it be, the classic of you haven't put the bins out or, it was your turn. Often there are so many hidden messages that actually it was about you not being present in that moment,
Yeah.
or it was about you not listening to me, or it was about me having to remind you about that.
Yeah. I can't trust you to do what
Mm.
we've agreed, or you're going to let me down, or I guess it goes into some of those, I'm not enough for you to take notice of me.
Yes, yes. And that is why, the connection piece, the affect regulation and the co-regulation is so important because that is where the foundation of trust
Yeah.
starts.
Yeah. Yeah. And that foundation of trust And when the affect is not being triggered, or the attachment system is not being triggered, then the couple can start to think and feel together.
Yes, 100%. And I do think that, psychoeducation has got a big role, to play with our couples. Often I find simply by just explaining even the window of tolerance,
Huh?
and what that looks like, and the hand model of the brain, which I know has been talked about in previous episodes. Just a 10-minute psychoeducation can make a real difference, because suddenly it transforms what can be such a negative space into a collaborative space. We're all working together. We're all trying to keep within the window of tolerance.
Yeah, I think what I was thinking when you were saying that is it makes it there's not something wrong with me or us. There is something that we can understand. And then it's that hope again, isn't it? Coming back to that.
It is. It is. So we're moving away from blame and pathology. And, we're looking at the problem being the problem, and the problem being that cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're using tools, such as psychoeducation, such as the co-regulation that we've talked about, to, as you say, Jo, really move out of that space of blame and conflict and tit for tat, and we're moving into an understanding arena.
Yeah. I often refer to it as a win-win. How can we make this a win-win rather than a I've got to win or you've got to lose? Because there's a lot of that happens, isn't there?
There's an awful lot of that happens. And I would say that the work has to be carried out outside of the session. I think often can be an expectation that we're going to fix it all in the session. And I would say also that this is something to really contract around in the early sessions, because yes, we can look at co-regulation and we can do all of this wonderful stuff within session, but it's got to be followed up outside. It's got to be practiced.
Yeah. You briefly touched on contracting there, Jane. Would you say a bit more about what other things might be important in that contract in terms of affect regulation? Because some couples might carry on the session afterwards, mightn't they, to carry
Yes.
on an argument?
Well, 100%. So I would say there's contracting that needs to happen before they come into a session and also when they leave. So I might have a conversation around almost bringing their best selves, at least starting in that way. And what might that involve? What might need to happen for them? So getting into a good habit of managing their own affect in advance of a session. What might that look like? I don't know about you, Jo, but often I can get couples coming straight from a work meeting.
Yeah.
They've kind of crammed it in, or they've gone straight from one thing to another to another.
They're
And
not
just
bringing their best
giving,
selves then.
yeah. I mean, ideally, and of course, this does sound very idealistic, doesn't it? But, what we're trying to do is to model, kind of almost an optimal situation for them to be able to explore what's keeping them stuck and to be able to change relational patterns. So that would be the bit about coming in. And as you rightfully say, there definitely needs to be something around what happens at the end of the session, especially if it's been perhaps a difficult session with lots of conflict around. And this might be a point at which we might introduce something called a connection ritual. So connection rituals are really opportunities for couples to co-regulate. It's an opportunity to feel safe and secure in each other's space that is predictable and consistent. So what that does is it gives often an experience that they haven't had, in childhood. So these connection rituals can become quite important. And it was just when you were mentioning about the ending there of a session, might be an opportunity to talk to them about what a connection ritual might look like for them out directly after a session.
To get them to practice that co-regulation, like you said. I loved what you said earlier about each person in the couple being responsible for their own affect. And as you said that, what occurred to me was, do you know what? I wonder if that would be a really new concept for some clients in that couple dynamic. Often, maybe if you're a bit more preoccupied, looking for the other person to co-regulate you, rather than being responsible for your own co-regulation.
Yes, I think that that is a really excellent point, and that may be something that we gently explore in the early sessions. How does that idea sit with each of them? And we may do it in a certain way, in a gentle way, that might say, noticing that often couple counselling can be, quite a tricky process. It can be quite challenging. I'm wanting for you both to keep yourselves safe and secure and for you to really look after yourselves. Let me just ask how you're planning to do that. So we might do that in kind of a slightly different way.
I love that. And also, it's empowering, isn't it, for the person who perhaps doesn't believe that they've got any resources themselves to calm their own affect. This idea that you can be responsible for that for yourself, you can do things to help yourself. And that kind of has a knock on effect, doesn't it, then within the couple? Because I guess if you've got the pursuer, for example, going after the withdrawer, and the withdrawer's thinking, I can't ever get this right. I don't really get it. I don't get what they want. I don't get why it's often the pursuer is creating the argument because some connection is better than no connection at all.
Exactly that. Exactly that. And just as you were saying that, Joe, it made me think about introducing techniques such as safe words.
Mm.
So when a couple leaves a session, we need to be kind of ensuring that they are able to slow themselves down, just as we've been coaching them perhaps to do so within a session. We might talk about a safe word strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I often say is come up with a word that gives you really good memories, because this needs to be a really positive strategy. This is not a point of failure. This is actually a point of success. So come up with a really good positive word.
Mm.
And then when either of you feel that you've just crept out of your window of tolerance, you need to say the word and contract beforehand what will happen. So who's going where? So the safe word strategy needs to be developed in advance. You might even do it in a session actually about what that looks like.
Mm.
And then when the safe word is said, what I sometimes suggest is that the partner that said the word has got the responsibility to say when they're ready to come back. And that time apart is an absolute opportunity for each partner to self-regulate.
Mm.
Whatever they're going to do there, whether it's going to be breathing, whether it's going to be going out for a walk, whether it's going to be listening to some music. That is their responsibility at that point to calm themselves.
I love the positive safe word. It has to be a positive memory. I really like that one. I'm going to nick that one. I'm having that in my toolkit. Have you got any other, you know, strategies that you may give to clients?
Yes, Joe. It was the Gottman, so the well-renowned relationship experts that often talk about a sense of fun and play in a relationship that can so easily be lost. And, how can we reintroduce that idea for our couples? How can we help them to manage their affect through fun and play, through almost triggering those happy, lovely hormones, the oxytocin, for example?
I love that.
Yeah, so there's so many ideas out there that we can use. One of my favorites is around the date night. Now, this has got a bit of a twist on it. So this one is where couples will, and what they can do is create rules. So if, for example, they are perhaps under some financial strain, they might create a rule where there's a budget of £10, for example. If they're constrained by babysitters, the rule might be it has to be in the house. But what they do is they each write a number of fun activities or whatever, they write them down. And it could be as simple as cooking together. It could be playing a game. It could be, it could be trying a new food. And what they do is they write these out, they cut them out, they scrunch them up and they put them in a pot. And then at the same time every week, they take turns to take one out. And it's then their responsibility to create that for that particular date night. And what that does is it stops this whose turn is it sort of situation. And it sort of activates a little bit of fun, a bit of surprise, a bit of play.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. The importance of play on affect regulation. Often it's not something that we talk about a lot, is it? That playfulness, but it has a massive impact, doesn't it, on being able to regulate and feel safe and secure and have fun. Have you got any other tips?
Well, I would say that for me, the close of the day, that sort of comes into the connection rituals. But what I find more and more, and it's probably with the onset of more and more technology, more and more working from home, and more kind of preoccupation with technology, is that couples seem to go to bed at different times and they really miss each other. So what I often talk about is, and be realistic about it. If you're not going to be able to do this every night, then pick some nights where it's going to happen, perhaps at the weekend. Create a little ritual for yourselves. What I would say is, the going to bed is not the time for any big arguments or discussions. It's definitely not. It's a real opportunity for connection to prepare your nervous systems for sleep and for rest. So that might be something like an appreciation for each other. It might be a prolonged hug or a cuddle. There's something powerful about closing the day together, preparing for rest.
It really sort of backs up that idea, doesn't it? Don't go to sleep on an argument.
It does. So we're taking that principle and we're just giving it a little bit.
Yeah. I think technology can really get in the way of affect regulation, particularly if one partner is on their phone all the time, is quite secretive about their phone. Maybe there's shame associated with what I mustn't take time for myself. I mustn't so they might be being secretive, and that can be interpreted very differently, can't it, from someone who is the other partner, should I say?
Yes, it absolutely can. And actually, I refer to phones as the modern curse of relationships. It's something that can have such a negative impact, but conversely, such a positive impact if the time between that the couple has is protected from that. So even as simple as an agreement of, we charge our phones outside of the bedroom at night, or, we have a time where we check in, which is another technique that I often talk about, checking in regularly at the same time every day. I use I think, I feel, I need. So they check in using that. And you might introduce maybe an imago concept at that point as well to help the couple to be able to really listen and understand each other.
I think you're right. The Imago model is really helpful, isn't it, in clarifying what's transmitted and what's received.
Yes, very much so. And that's really important when it comes to affect regulation, because if a couple aren't doing that, what they're basically in is this horrible game of tennis, which is the listening to respond. If we move away from that into listening to understand, as you say, that's when we can just slow things down and really receive perhaps the message that is intended.
Yeah. And I think, what's kind of weaved its way through the whole of our chat today is this idea of slowing things down. And I know for me, I mean, not so much now, but I know when I very first started seeing couples, I felt a huge responsibility as a therapist to make a difference quickly. And great supervision helped me to see that actually some of the acting out, some of the arguments are helpful, but it's a balance, isn't it? It's a balance between stepping in and stepping out and managing that with a couple, would you say?
I would totally agree. And, I had similar experiences to yourself as well, that real urge to fix. But I think, upon reflection, when we inadvertently even put ourselves into that expert position, that creates a whole new dynamic, between the couple as well. So for ourselves, it's so important to be able to slow things down.
Yeah. You just talked there about the dynamic between the three. My experience has been sometimes that either one of the couple feel that I might be siding with the other one, even though I worked very hard to try and not have that. Is that something that's you resonates with you?
Yes, it does, because we're all human, aren't we? So, sometimes these things are going to crop up, and wherever there's a three. And of course, as much as we can, use our curiosity, sometimes that will happen. And, what I will often do is certainly take that to supervision. But secondly, just explore that sometimes within the session as well, if it's appropriate, of course.
Yeah. And there's a concept, isn't there? You just touched on that about being a three. There's a very different concept, isn't there? And we could go down a rabbit hole here, so I probably won't go down. But it's, something very, very interesting to think about being in a triad rather than a dyadic relationship.
Yes, I completely agree. And many attachment wounds potentially there as well for people.
Yeah. Well, let's take a pause there. You've done the training, built your client hours, developed your own way of working, but perhaps you're beginning to wonder, what's next? Is it couples therapy, clinical supervision, or senior accreditation? Our CPCAB Level 7 Attachment Focused Psychotherapeutic Pathway to Clinical Mastery has been designed to fulfill all of those. It's for experienced attachment-informed therapists ready to deepen and extend their clinical practice. We'll explore advanced trauma work, attachment-informed supervision, and couples therapy alongside research, whilst developing a greater depth in your own professional identity. This is advanced training for therapists who are ready to stretch themselves. We're now accepting applications for our September intake. Search optimaattachment.co.uk to explore this Level 7 pathway and see whether this is your next step. So welcome back, everybody, to our affect regulation and working with couples. Jane, I was just thinking about a dilemma. So I wonder what your thoughts are on working with a couple and they're online. They're not in the same building. They're both remotely, and sort of 35 minutes into the session, one of the couple gets themselves so wound up that they say, right, that's it, and I'm going and I'm leaving, and they press the exit on the Zoom, and you're left with the other partner. What would be your way of working with that?
Yeah, and I think this is a really common one, actually, and I'm really glad that you've brought this one. So the important thing to remember here is that our client is the couple.
Mhm.
And if we carry on a conversation with the person that's left, we leave ourselves open for a potential boundary issue. So perhaps a secret might be revealed, or even just carrying on that conversation, we may lose neutrality. So we have to remember that the client is the couple. So what I would do in that situation is I would explain that I'm going to end this session for now. I would obviously check in to make sure the person I've got with me is okay. I would also explain to them that I'm going to contact the partner and just make sure that they are okay as well. And then what I would do is when we come back together is talk about what happened and perhaps recontract around what is going to happen. What would they each like to do if either of them becomes dysregulated? So we might bring that safe word into session, for example, and actually model that and use that.
Yeah. I was just wondering if that has happened, if we notice that particular partner starts to emotionally escalate in another session, whether we might just say, like you were saying earlier, let's just pause and reconnect to mitigate that situation happening again. If we know their kind of attachment defense is to leave, is to flee.
Yes. 100%. So we are using our sense of attunement there, aren't we? We're really noticing, especially I would say towards the end of a session. As we know, endings are triggers within themselves, especially from an attachment perspective. So we really need to be tuning in at that point. And as you say, Joe, perhaps directing and just noticing and calming and slowing the couple.
Yeah. And if you're new to couples work, that will be quite a different concept, wouldn't it? To direct, particularly if we're more sort of person-centered in our approach. So it might feel quite uncomfortable for us as therapists to be a bit more directive.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And that definitely comes with experience and it comes with confidence and it comes through supervision as well. Having that confidence, isn't it really? And that presence And that, but what we're doing is we're constantly keeping our clients in mind. What would be the best intervention that I could use right now for this couple?
What's going to benefit the most in this particular moment? And I guess it's also, isn't it, about helping, you were saying earlier, sort of tying this back up about the window of tolerance. Your defense is to flee. That's what's kept you safe. I totally get that that's your strategy, your chosen strategy. But actually, I wonder what that then, leaves in its wake. What's the downside of that strategy? Because I guess when one person leaves, the other person is then, and particularly if there's abandonment in their strategy, then you've got, two affects on the bubble again. One's left to look after themselves, but the other one's left feeling abandoned.
Yes, you're absolutely right there. So, and what I loved about where you started that was about your soothing. So you were kind of soothing the defense, and you were naming it, but in a very soothing way, but then almost gently challenging to say, what change might look like, perhaps.
Yeah, I know for a lot of couples, that happens a lot. One leaves and the other one feels abandoned, and then they have no real strategy of getting back because the affect is just too great. It is almost like reparenting in a way. That's our job, isn't it, as a couples therapist?
It is. It is reparenting. It's kind of enabling that rupture and that repair. And it's about being the secure base for both of them.
I love that. Being the secure base for both of them. Thank you. Jane, I can't thank you enough for talking to us about your experiences with couples therapy. And if you're a counsellor and you would like to know more about attachment or working with couples, our level 5 and level 7 diplomas cover attachment-based psychotherapy. And you can find full details at optimahealthservices.co.uk. That's also where you can download your CPD certificate for the time spent listening to this podcast today. And this is available for all of our episodes. There's a link in the show notes. Jane, a huge thank you to you and to everybody who's joined us today on Attached Together. And we hope to see you and everyone else again soon.
Thank you, Jo.